All right, in this video, we'll be looking at the last section of Unit 7, 7.13, Origins of Life on Earth. So there are several hypotheses about the origin of life on Earth and the origin of Earth in general. Um, geologic evidence supports for this idea that Earth collided with a smaller planet at some point in its history, several billion years ago, 4.6 billion years ago, and that collision caused the formation of the Earth's atmosphere, and also caused the different layers of the Earth to kind of form the way that they are now. And life, of course, for millions of years was too hostile for Earth was too hostile for life on Earth because it was so hot. But as the Earth cooled down, oceans began to form, and life began to form as well. And so on the right there, you have what is believed to be fossil evidence of the earliest prokaryotic life forms, which date back to around 3.5 billion years ago. So a couple other things concerning primitive Earth. Basically, the idea is that primitive Earth contained inorganic molecules, kind of like precursors to the current organic molecules. The presence or the lack of presence or the absence of oxygen in the atmosphere, but the presence of carbon-based molecules like CO2, methane, and others in the environment would have created the conditions that would have made organic molecules be able to be formed. And there have been some experimentation that has been done with this, most famously the Stanley Miller or Miller-Urey experiment, which simulated early Earth's atmosphere by putting on these gases like methane, water vapor, ammonia, hydrogen gas, hydrogen sulfide, CO2. There's others that we could list here as well. And they created an electric spark in this gas tube, which is going to break and form the bonds. And as it goes through this condenser here, it's going to turn back to water, and those newly formed organic molecules are going to be collected out of that, and then this is going to kind of cycle. And so when Miller-Urey did this experiment, they discovered the formation of amino acids and nucleotides in the soup that was created. And so the idea is that if these amino acids and nucleotides can be formed, that perhaps they can create some sort of self-replicating system. How you get from molecules to life is still something that science is unsure of, but there are some hypotheses concerning that, and one of those is RNA World. Um, the idea is that RNA would have had to have formed. Proteins probably came first, but then those proteins need to be replicated, right? If there's a good protein, then it's just the same sort of process that we've been talking about with natural selection. There are good things and there are bad things. And so the good proteins would need to be replicated, and there need to be information that would be able to be stored long term. And so RNA is going to serve as that information source, also as the replicator, because RNA will actually form enzymes as well. And we see this when we talked about protein synthesis. Things like tRNA, rRNA are kind of have some enzymatic function. And so RNA would have been self-replicating and also been able to store the information for proteins. Um, DNA would come along later as a more stable variant of that, and then would become the prominent variant, if not, prominent in that all life is formed at its base from DNA. RNA is still around, which is exactly what you would expect. It hasn't been phased out or anything, but DNA is going to form the backbone of life because it's a much more stable molecule and much easier to replicate.